Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at the 50/50 Accelerator podcast. And my guest today is Brad Henderson. And during our pre interview, we had a fascinating conversation. Oh, Brad is from the Consistency Edge Leadership Coaching Program, which he runs. I always forget to tell people what these folks actually do in their real life, but we had this really interesting conversation about family business transition. And Brad is in a really unique position that he's been a hired hand in a couple of family businesses where they were going through generational transition. So we're going to start there. So I'm going to bring Brad in and we'll start. Hey, Brad, how are you today?
Awesome, Josh. Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Um, so tell me a little bit about, when you were working with other businesses. I mean, when you were a hired hand, what was that like?
So I'll start by saying that over the 40 something years that I've been in business, I've worked for companies large and small. So worked for many enterprise companies in leadership roles, but have also been involved in some of the family owned and operated businesses that you talked about. And it was a real change for me when I came to my first family owned business because it had been run really as an enterprise to serve the family that owned the business. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what it was. But the patriarch wanted the business to grow beyond him and his family, and he wanted it to be more sustainable. And that was the impetus for him bringing me into the business. So that was really my first experience with that.
So were you able to get the family to focus on enterprise value besides family value?
Yes, we focused on making the business sales ready, and even if there wasn't going to be a capital event, it was really the rally cry, if you like, to try and change a number of the dynamics that happened within the company. And it was really to try and introduce some more rigor and discipline into the operations. A lot of businesses, when they start off, you can have a staff meeting in the elevator because it's so small. But when the organization gets beyond being able to do that, particularly if there's a number of different geographic locations, that's where things start to change significantly, and where many owner operators find themselves a little bit out of their depth in terms of how to manage that. So when we put a lot of that process and procedure in place, it was a bit foreign not only to the founders, but also to the people who had come to work in the organization because they had bought into a more freewheeling, organization where things were talked about in the morning and implemented in the afternoon. So that I think the balance was to be able to retain that flexibility because it's definitely one of the strengths of a small or medium sized company, but at the same time start to introduce the processes and procedures that will help to yield that consistent result that was looking for, and to also appear more valuable to a potential either merger and acquisition party or someone who's actually going to take the business over.
So did they actually end up selling the business, or what was the result when you left?
So the result was an exit, and we ended up selling a company of about uh, 80 people, about $100 million in revenue, to one of Canada's large telecommunications companies.
Oh,
And
cool.
that was a very positive outcome for the family because it provided the generational wealth that they were looking for. It released the generational wealth that was in that business. It was also designed to try and give a pathway to the employees in the business because, as a comparatively small organization, there were limited opportunities for the employees to grow. and there was no stock ownership equity vehicle inside of the smaller company. So moving to the larger company, they got options in the larger company, and that became a new opportunity for them. In addition to the fact that they could grow into different areas, have custom career development plans, have a more robust career process.
So, just a little, aside. My second book is called The Sale Ready Company, by the way. So, one of my big beliefs is businesses need to be sale ready, even if you have no intention of selling.
Absolutely.
And if you do that, your business is much more fun to run. It's probably more profitable, and people actually know what they're supposed to do. One of the things I love about systems, I don't like running systems myself because they annoy me, but that's besides the point. I'm a founder, so what can you say? Um, but the nice thing about systems is your employees, your team members know what they need to do for excellence, and your customers know what to expect on a consistent basis.
Totally.
And
Totally.
without that, neither of those happened.
No, and you have, the old adage: are you working on the business or are you working in the business? And if you're monkeying around with the business, you're not building a sustainable one,
Yeah.
which is going to have enterprise value at the end of the day. And so it's being able to package that message up in a way that is digestible to the families that are running the business, so that they understand that you're doing these things for their own good. You're trying to plot their well-being, as
Yes.
opposed to putting in processes and procedures for some academic reason or purpose.
Yeah, I hate academic purposes because they don't work in business, in my experience.
Yeah.
But um,
Just a quick little note: the company in question, the company we were talking about, was a system integrator. So it integrated sophisticated computer systems, and its customers were medium and large organizations, so enterprise organizations. And the reason why these people were successful is because they were able to attract technology people who wanted to be involved in the most complicated, integrated processes in the marketplace. And so they were able to attract better talent than other companies. But what they didn't do is they didn't write these things down. So their processes, their solutions, if you like, were very much of, trust us, we've done it before, we can do it again, we'll fix it for you. And that's a very difficult business model to be able to sell, if you like, to a potential person who's going to acquire your company. So we just very simply took what it was that they were doing, documented it into system processes and procedures, and we actually used Lego blocks as a visual to be able to say our solutions are like individual Lego blocks, and where our specialty is being able to put those Lego blocks together in a way that best suits your requirements for the business.
that's
And
a good metaphor.
it was unbelievable, because when we sold the company to this large telco, a named part of the acquisition was the intellectual property that was this Lego blocks and the documentation that went behind it. So to be able to demonstrate to the founders that this was something that was comparatively simple, maybe even considered a perfunctory exercise, added significant value to the eventual sale of the company, was the ultimate aha moment for them in terms of how it all came to be.
Now, you also worked for a private enterprise where there was a rising generation that was getting ready to take over the business. Can you talk a little bit about what the challenges might have been there?
Yeah, and the challenge is when the next generation is not necessarily cut from the same cloth as the founder, and the founder, either the matriarch, patriarch, might have grand designs that the business stay in the family for generations. But it's really a question of whether the matriarch patriarch is going to be able to let go of the reins, and whether the scion, if you like, is going to be coachable in that model and not feel overly privileged, and feel that just because their last name is the same as the founder's last name, potentially the same name as the company, that they are magically endowed with all of the same capabilities to be able to take over the business. And typically the founder, and I know you know this because you've been in the same situation, the founder, what got them to where they are right now is not what's going to get them to the next stage. And so if all they're doing is following what the founder did for the last 10, 20 or more years, they're not going to necessarily be able to grow. And there's a multi-part dance to that, because if the founder feels, well, what got us here is going to get us to the place next, and if the scion feels either that's right, or they feel that something else needs to be done, but they're being pulled in the opposite direction by their parent, then that is where you get a lot of challenges.
Yeah, that's one of the big deals I find is that, and I tell the elder generation that, look, at your rising generation is going to do things differently. Just get over it, because that's what's going to happen. They're going to do things differently. Some will be better, some might be a little bit worse, but if we have them do small experiments, we're likely not to hurt ourselves very much.
A controlled fall is, I think, what we call
Well,
it.
the truth is, in business, most of the things you try don't work. And where my issue is when you go on a major project and put all this energy into something, you're not going to give up till way past you should have given up. But if you're doing small pieces, if you break that great big thing down to lots of small chunks, and you do one chunk at a time, if it doesn't work, it doesn't hurt.
No, no.
So
It's an excellent point, Josh, and I'll bring up another aspect of it, and that is for lack of a better term, the Midas touch.
yeah,
So the company who started off and they're building widgets, and then all of a sudden they decide, well, we were very good at building widgets, so we must be able to be very good at building something else. And they take that same business model, they superimpose it on potentially either an acquisition or a startup or some combination,
yeah,
and they're shocked that their skills and capabilities don't translate or don't transport into this new business. And to your point, they keep chasing that same opportunity, not recognizing that there's been a systemic failure in the approach to that.
yeah, absolutely. So, what did you do to get the rising generation ready to take over the family business?
I think the most important thing was to try and help them to understand, in doing it in a very diplomatic and respectful way, that they needed they needed to understand that they needed a lot, they needed to learn a lot, and being able to have that conversation, you have to build a relationship. People are not going to take what you say until you've got some level of rapport. So a big part of the job is building the rapport early on in the process, not trying to force it.
Yeah,
And then once you've got that rapport, being able to bridge it and to say, okay, well, look, here are the things that you need to develop in order to become that leader, and to recognize the things that the matriarch, patriarch may have done well and should be replicated, and the things that they may have not done well that should not be replicated. So it's a journey. It's not a one and done meeting. You know, it's a
how
long
many
term
how many
process.
years did it take you to get the rising generation to be ready to take over the business?
Oh, I would say it was probably 4 years.
Yeah,
4
that's
years.
been my average is 3 to 5 years is what I
Yeah.
find.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge I see, I'm curious if you see the same thing, is having the rising generation change their mindset from an employee's mindset to an owner's mindset. And
Yeah.
I don't care what you do, that unless you actually work, at least has been my experience, unless you work really hard on changing that mindset, there's a good chance that the transition is going to fail.
I think I absolutely agree. And I also think that they need to start to think of themselves as leaders.
Yes.
In many cases, if you're working for a very strong personality family member, you've almost been relegated to a follower. It might be a fast follower. You might have a follower with an opinion and an ability to say something, but you're still a follower and not a
Yeah.
leader. So the leap, the journey, the migration to that leadership mentality, in addition to the owner mentality, is an important step, and it's something that can be taught. It's something that can be learned if that person is open and wanting to see that journey for themselves.
That's been my experience also. And this is where the value of somebody like you comes in, is that I believe rising generations should never report to their parents. And that's where the hired hand comes in, is that the rising generation reports to the hired hand. The hired hand can say things to the rising generation, the younger generation, that the parent can't say because it won't be received well because of family dynamics when they were growing up. Um,
And that's easy to say, and it intellectually might be the case for a lot of people. But when you go to the family dinner on Sunday night,
yeah,
and the only one that's missing from that table is the hired hand,
yeah,
that's where the challenge begins to break down, because those conversations on Monday morning are all about, well, this is what we talked about last night at dinner. And so you have to be able to not control it, not contain it, but to steer it in the right direction.
my belief is the hired hand needs to have the ability of speaking truth to power. In other words, you have to be able to go to the senior generation and say, stop having these conversations, they're not helpful.
Yep.
And you don't want to say it that way because that like will get you fired, but essentially that's what you want to be saying.
Well, I always remember Jack Welch's line, which is that I'd rather be fired for something I did than something I didn't do.
Yeah,
And so I've always pushed, maybe sometimes to my detriment, a little harder than otherwise might be the case, for the exact reason that you just mentioned, and that is that they may not be what they wanted to hear, but it's what they needed to hear.
well, my experience also, especially if the elder generation is a founding generation, they're fine for you getting right in their face and saying stuff that other people think you should never say. In fact, they love it because nobody ever tells them tells them the truth, because
Yep.
they're so used to shooting down other people that if they can't shoot you down, they kind of go back for a second. This is interesting.
Yeah, totally. And it gets back to that building of rapport,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
unless you've built that rapport, and what I've seen in other situations where colleagues of mine have gone in and taken perhaps a little too strong a hand and not spent the time building the rapport, is that they become out of good graces with
Yes.
the founders.
Yep.
And sometimes the founders are not great employee managers, and particularly if they brought on somebody at a very high level. So then the relationship becomes very dysfunctional.
Yep.
They don't talk. They talk only when necessary.
Yep.
They're talking by each other as opposed to each other, and that's where things start to break down. And either it gets to a point where somebody, either the hired gun leaves, or the family decides that they need to part ways. And of course, hired guns are used to employment agreements and severance packages and those kinds of perks. Whereas more family-owned businesses are like, if you're leaving, go. Good luck to you, but there's no exit package here. So that can be another source of tension and frustration.
You ought to negotiate that up front, would be my recommendation.
Totally, but that doesn't mean to say that it isn't a more challenging situation on the
No,
other.
it can be. And those are typically the family transitions that fail.
Yeah, yeah,
And there's an awful lot of them that fail.
right.
You
And I
know,
think, Josh, it comes back to that point about your experience in 3 to 5 years, mine saying 4 years.
yeah,
You have to approach it as a long-term venture, and you have to approach it with something that has consistency.
yes,
Because if it's on one day and off the next day, it isn't going to stick. And the employees are used to a certain regime, and if that regime keeps moving back from what it used to be to what it wants to be in the future, and it isn't kind of moving in one direction or the other, they're going to be very reticent to get on to the new program. And that's going to be another speed bump in the whole
well, they
process.
may try to sabotage it because they'll go back to the owner, the founder, and say blah 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 blah. But we can't do that, and they overrule you, and they've learned that they can go around you. And this is even a bigger problem with the rising generation. Is that I always say, if you're going to have your rising generation run a section, you can't overrule them, and you can't get in the way. You have to. They come to you with a problem. You say, "That's cool. Have you talked to my son or my daughter?" And if the answer is no, say, well, go talk to them. And if that doesn't work, then the three of us will talk.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I always train the elder generation. That's how you have to answer these questions. Otherwise, you're usurping the authority. And by the way, the same with me.
Totally.
So
No,
anyway, Brad, I am really sorry, but we are out of time.
well, you
And
warned me.
yes, and I know you've written a book on leadership. So tell us a little bit about that and where you can find it and that kind of good stuff.
Sure, thank you. With my 45 years of experiences in large companies and small companies, helping smaller companies grow and build infrastructure, and sort of ironically helping large companies to strip out the bureaucracy that was getting in their own way and becoming more lean and mean, like the smaller organizations I worked with. I used my memoir, if you like, as a framework to share all of the lessons that I've learned, the hard fought successes, the humbling setbacks, and to help the next generation of leaders be able to benefit from that. My hope is that everybody will make new mistakes and not make the old ones, because there's really no excuse for making the old ones, because they're pretty well documented. But if anyone is interested in the book, it's coming out in the next couple of weeks. They can go to my website, which is www.consistency-edge.com. So www.consistency-edge.com. Sign up for the mailing list, and I'll make sure you get an advance copy.
Cool. Sounds great. And I've got two things I'd like you to do. First is wherever you're listening to this podcast, please give us an honest rating and review. If you love us, give us 5 stars. If you hate us, give us 1 star, and I'll just cry a little bit. I promise. I won't get your keyboard all wet, but that doesn't happen anyhow. And the second thing is we're always looking for great guests like Brad. So if you own a business and you have a story to tell, or you have a challenge that you would like some help with, why don't you send me an email at jpatrick@stage2solution. That's the number 2 with the solution being singular.com. Let me know you are interested in being on the show, and I'll send you a link and we'll have a conversation to see if you would make a good guest for us. Again, that's jpatrick@stage2solution.com. And you're at the 50/50 Accelerator Podcast. This is Josh Patrick with Brad Henderson. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here again real soon.